Thank you. Hare Krishna. So we're reading Krishna book. Is this chapter 54? And we've come partway through the chapter. We're beginning with Rukmini first addressed Krishna as Yogeshwar. Krishna has arrested Rukmi, and it seems that he's ready to kill Rukmi. And Rukmini is going to plead with Krishna for Rukmi's, her brother's life. Where are all those people? Okay. Yeah.
Rukmini first addressed Krishna as Yogeshwara. Yogeshwara means one who is possessed of inconceivable opulence and energy. Krishna possesses inconceivable opulence and energy, whereas Rukmini's brother had only limited military potency. Krishna is immeasurable, whereas her brother was measured in every step of his life. Therefore, Rukmi was not comparable even to an insignificant insect before the unlimited power of Krishna. She also addressed Krishna as the God of the gods. There are many powerful demigods such as Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, Indra, Chandra, Varuna, but Krishna is the Lord of all these gods, whereas Rukmini's brother was not only an ordinary human being, but in fact the lowest of all because he had no understanding of Krishna. In other words, a human being who has no conception of the actual position of Krishna is the lowest in human society. Then Rukmini addressed Krishna as Mahabhuja, which means one with unlimited strength. She also addressed Krishna as Jagatpati, the master of the whole cosmic manifestation. In comparison, her brother was only an ordinary prince. In this way, Rukmini compared the position of Rukmi with that of Krishna and very feelingly pleaded with her husband not to kill her brother just at the auspicious time of her being united with Krishna, but to excuse him. In other words, she displayed her real position as a woman. She was happy to get Krishna as her husband at the moment when her marriage to another was to be performed. But she did not want it to be at loss of her elder brother, who, after all, loved his young sister and wanted to hand her over to one who, according to his own calculations, was a better man. While Rukmini was praying to Krishna for the life of her brother, her whole body trembled, and because of her anxiety, her face appeared to dry up and her throat became choked. And due to trembling, the ornaments on her body loosened and fell scattered on the ground. In this manner, when Rukmini was very much perturbed, she fell down on the ground, and Lord Krishna immediately became compassionate and agreed not to kill the foolish Rukmi. But at the same time, he wanted to give him some light punishment. So he tied him up with a piece of cloth and snipped at his mustache beard, and hair, keeping some spots here and there. While Krishna was dealing with Rukmi in this way, the soldiers of the Yadu dynasty, commanded by Balaram himself, broke the whole strength of Rukmi's army, just as an elephant in a pond discards the feeble stem of a lotus flower. In other words, as an elephant breaks the whole construction of a lotus flower while bathing in a reservoir of water, the military strength of the Yadus broke up Rukmi's forces. When the commanders of the Yadu dynasty came back to see Krishna, they were all surprised to see the condition of Rukmi. Lord Balaram became especially compassionate towards his sister-in-law, who was newly married to his brother. To please Rukmini, Balaram personally untied Rukmi, and to further please her, Balaram, as the elder brother of Krishna, spoke some words of chastisement. Krishna, your action is not at all satisfactory, he said. This is an abomination very much contrary to our family tradition. To cut someone's hair and shave his mustache and beard is almost comparable to killing him. Whatever Rukmi might have been, he is now our brother-in-law, a relative of our family, and you should not have put him in such a condition. After this, to pacify Rukmini, Lord Balaram said to her, "You should not be very sorry that your brother has been made odd-looking. Everyone suffers or enjoys the results of his own actions." Lord Balaram wanted to impress upon Rukmini that she should not be sorry for the consequences her brother suffered due to his actions. There was no need of being too affectionate toward such a brother. Balaram again turned towards Krishna and said, "My dear Krishna, a relative, even though he commits such a blunder and deserves to be killed, should be excused. For when such a relative is conscious of his own fault, that consciousness itself is like death. Therefore, there's no need to kill him." Balaram again turned towards Rukmini and informed her that the current duty of the Kshatriya in human society is so fixed that, according to the principles of fighting, one's own brother may become an enemy. Then a Kshatriya does not hesitate to kill his own brother. In other words, Lord Balaram wanted to instruct Rukmini that Rukmi and Krishna were right in not showing mercy to each other in the fighting, despite the family consideration that they happened to be brothers-in-law. Sri Balaram informed Rukmini that Kshatriyas are typical emblems of the materialistic way of life. They become puffed up whenever there is a question of material acquisition. Therefore, when there is a fight between two belligerent Kshatriyas for kingdom, land, wealth, women, prestige, or power, they try to put one another into the most abominable condition. Balaram instructed Rukmini that her affection towards her brother Rukmi, who had created enmity with so many persons, was a perverse consideration befitting an ordinary materialist. Her brother's character was not at all admirable, considering his treatment of his friends, and yet Rukmini, like an ordinary woman, was affectionate toward him. He was not fit to be her brother, and still Rukmini was lenient towards him. Besides that, Balaram continued, the consideration that a person is neutral or is one's friend or enemy is generally made by persons in the bodily concept of life. Such foolish persons are bewildered by the illusory energy of the Supreme Lord. The spirit soul is of the same pure quality in any embodiment of matter, but those who are not sufficiently intelligent see only the bodily differences between animals and men, literates and illiterates, rich and poor, which cover the pure spirit soul. Such differences, observed merely on the basis of the body, are exactly like the differences between fires in terms of the various types of fuel they consume. Whatever the size and shape of the fuel, there is no such variety of size and shape in the fire which comes out. Similarly, in the sky, there are no differences in size or shape. In this way, Balaram reconciled the situation by his moral and ethical instructions to Rukmini and Krishna. To Rukmini, he stated further, "This body is part of the material manifestation consisting of the material elements, living conditions, and interactions, consisting of the material elements, living conditions, and interactions of the modes of material nature. The living entity, or spirit soul, being in contact with these, is transmigrating from one body to another due to illusory enjoyment, and that transmigration is known as material existence. This contact of the living entity with the material manifestation has neither integration nor disintegration. My dear chaste sister-in-law, the spirit soul is, of course, the cause of this material body, just as the sun is the cause of sunlight, eyesight, and the forms of material manifestation. The example of the sunshine and the material manifestation is very appropriate in understanding the living entity's contact with the material world. In the morning, the sun rises, and the heat and light gradually expand throughout the whole day. The sun is the cause of all material shapes and forms, for it is due to the sun that integration and disintegration of material elements take place. But as soon as the sun sets, the whole manifestation is no longer connected to the sun, which has passed from one place to another. When the sun passes from the eastern to the western hemisphere, the results of the interactions due to the sunshine in the eastern hemisphere remain, but the sunshine itself is visible in the western hemisphere. Similarly, the living entity accepts or produces different bodies and different bodily relationships in a particular circumstance. But as soon as he gives up the present body and accepts another, he has nothing to do with the former body. Similarly, the living entity has nothing to do with the next body he accepts. He is always free from the contact of this bodily contamination. Therefore, continued Balaram, the appearance and disappearance of the body have nothing to do with the living entity, just as the waxing and waning of the moon have nothing to do with the moon. Unquote. When the moon waxes, we falsely think that the moon is developing, and when it wanes, we think the moon is decreasing. Factually, the moon as it is always the same. It has nothing to do with such visible activities of waxing and waning. Balaram continued, one's consciousness in material existence can be compared to sleeping and dreaming. When a man sleeps, he dreams of many non-factual happenings, and as a result of dreaming, he becomes subject to different kinds of distress and happiness. Similarly, when a person is in the dream of material consciousness, he suffers the effects of accepting a body and giving it up again in material existence. Opposite to this material consciousness is Krishna consciousness. In other words, when a man is elevated to the platform of Krishna consciousness, he becomes free from this false conception of life. In this way, Sri Balaram instructed Rukmini in spiritual knowledge. He further addressed his sister-in-law thus: "Sweet, smiling Rukmini, do not be aggrieved by false notions caused by ignorance. Only because of false notions does one become unhappy. But one can immediately remove this unhappiness by discussing the philosophy of actual life. Be happy on that platform only." After hearing such enlightening instructions from Sri Balaram, Rukmini immediately became pacified and happy and adjusted her mind, which was very much afflicted by the degraded position of her brother Rukmi. As far as Rukmi was concerned, his promise was not fulfilled, nor was his mission successful. He had come from home with his soldiers and military phalanx to defeat Krishna and release his sister, but on the contrary, he lost all his soldiers and military strength. He was personally degraded and very sorry, but by the grace of the Lord, he could continue his life to its fixed destination. Because he was a Kshatriya, he could remember his promise that he would not return to his capital city, Kundina. Without killing Krishna and releasing his sister, he would not return to his capital city, Kundin, without killing Krishna and releasing his sister, which he had failed to do. Therefore, he decided in anger not to return to his capital city, and he constructed a small cottage in the village known as Bhojakata, where he resided for the rest of his life. After defeating all the opposing elements and forcibly carrying away Rukmini, Krishna brought her to his capital city, Dwaraka, and then married her according to the Vedic ritualistic principles. After this marriage, Krishna became the king of the Yadus at Dwaraka. On the occasion of his marriage with Rukmini, all the inhabitants were happy, and in every house there were great ceremonies. The inhabitants of Dwaraka city were so much pleased that they dressed themselves with the nicest possible ornaments and garments and went to present gifts according to their means to the newly married couple Krishna and Rukmini. All the houses of Yadupuri, Dwaraka, were decorated with flags, festoons, and flowers. Each and every house had an extra gate specifically prepared for this occasion, and on both sides of the gate were big water jugs filled with water. The whole city was made fragrant by the burning of fine incense, and at night there was illumination from thousands of lamps which decorated every building. The entire city appeared jubilant on the occasion of Lord Krishna's marriage with Rukmini. Everywhere in the city there were profuse decorations of banana trees and betel nut trees. These two trees are considered very auspicious in happy ceremonies. At the same time, there was an assembly of many elephants who carried the respective kings of different friendly kingdoms. It is the habit of the elephant that whenever he sees some small plants and trees, Out of his sportive and frivolous nature, he uproots the trees and throws them hither and thither. The elephants assembled on this occasion also scattered the banana and betel nut trees, but in spite of such intoxicated action, the whole city, with the trees thrown here and there, looked very nice. The friendly kings of the Kurus and the Pandavas were represented by Bhishma, Dhritarashtra, the five Pandavas, King Drupada, King Santardana, and Rukmini's father Bhishmaka. Because of Krishna's kidnapping Rukmini, there was initially some misunderstanding between the two families, but Bhishmaka, the king of Vidarbha, being approached by Sri Balaram and persuaded by many saintly persons, was induced to participate in the marriage ceremony of Krishna and Rukmini. Although the incident of the kidnapping was not a very happy occurrence in the kingdom of Vidarbha, kidnapping was not an unusual affair among Kshatriyas. Kidnapping was, in fact, current in almost all their marriages. Anyway, King Bhishmaka was from the very beginning inclined to hand over his beautiful daughter to Krishna. In one way or another, his purpose had been served, and so he was pleased to join the marriage ceremony, even though his eldest son was degraded in the fight. It is mentioned in the Padma Purana that Maharaj Nanda and the cowherd boys of Vrindavan joined the marriage ceremony. Kings from the kingdoms of Kuru, Srinjaya, Kekaya, Vidarbha, and Kunti all came to Dwaraka on this occasion and met with one another very joyfully. The story of Rukmini's being kidnapped by Krishna was poeticized, and professional readers recited it everywhere. All the assembled kings and their daughters especially were struck with wonder and very much pleased upon hearing the chivalrous activities of Krishna. In this way, all the visitors as well as the inhabitants of Dwarka city were joyful to see Krishna and Rukmini together. In other words, the goddess of fortune was now united with the Supreme Lord, the maintainer of everyone, and thus all the people felt extremely jubilant. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport of the 54th chapter of Krishna. Krishna defeats all the princes and takes Rukmini home to Dwarka.
Om Jnana, too high. Om Jnana-timirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Tadhati Shapadantikam Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Jatapada Kamalang Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Shagrajatam Shahagana Raghunathan Vitam Stam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Shahagana Lolita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kamshana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sude Devi Pranamami Hori Priye Vansha Kolpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindho Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So Krishna, Rukmini is pleading to Krishna, essentially, you're great, you're Yogeshwara, you're Jagatpati, you're Deva Deva, and you're Mahabhuja, and my brother is just an ordinary prince. So please don't kill him, especially on this auspicious occasion of our marriage. And Prabhupada comments that she was very glad to get Krishna as her husband, but she didn't want it to be at the expense of the life of her brother. And Krishna agreed not to kill Rukmi, but decided to give him some light punishment, and so tied him up and cut off his beard and mustache and hair in patches. And in this way, in patches, right? Yeah, in patches. And making him, as Balaram will later say, odd looking. So this is humiliation. Sampavita shachakirtir maranad atirichite. Prabhupada said it's comparable to death, or Krishna says worse than death. If someone has been honored, then for him to be humiliated in such a fashion is worse than death. So the Yadu dynasty soldiers broke the strength of Rukmi's forces, and Balaram personally arrived on the scene where Krishna was dealing with Rukmi and gave essentially opposite instructions to both Balaram and Rukmini and Krishna. To Rukmini, he said, well, first of all, he admonished Krishna, oh, this is not very good. This is contrary to our family tradition. He's like our brother-in-law now, and whatever he may have done, you shouldn't have done this. So he's the elder brother, he has that prerogative. So he chews out Krishna a little bit, admonishes him. And then he turns to Rukmini and says, you shouldn't be sorry that such a brother has been dealt with this way. Everyone gets the results of his own actions. So you shouldn't be affectionate to such a brother. Then he turns to Krishna and says, even if a relative, he's our relative, even if a relative does something, commits a blunder for which he deserves to be killed, he should be excused. He'll be conscious of his own fault, and that's punishment enough. Then he turns to Rukmini and says, well, this is how it is between Kshatriyas. Kshatriyas are stern people. They don't hesitate even to kill their own brothers. They don't show mercy. This is their nature. So Rukmini's affection toward Rukmi, who created enmity with so many persons, was a perverse consideration befitting an ordinary materialist. His character was not at all admirable. Still like an ordinary woman, she was affectionate to him. He was unfit to be her brother. Still, she's being lenient. Then Krishna, he gives a spiritual instruction that the idea that someone's friend or enemy or neutral is generally made by persons in the bodily concept of life, bewildered by the illusory energy. Spirit soul's always the same. There's no difference between men and animals, literates and illiterates, rich and poor. Only on the bodily platform do we see these differences. They're like the differences between fire, which appears different according to the fuel, but fire is fire. Similarly, sky, no differences of size or shape. Sky is sky. So the spirit souls of that nature, and the body is part of matter, so it's constituted according to the modes of nature, and the soul is transmigrating from one body to another, but the soul is unaffected. And the soul is the cause of the body, just as the sun is the cause of sunlight. So these various relationships appear because of the body, but the body comes and goes, and the living entity really has nothing to do with these bodily changes, just as the moon has nothing to do with waxing and waning. That's only from our point of view that it seems to grow and shrink. The moon is always the same. When asleep, we dream of so many things, but they're all non-factual. Similarly, a dreaming person in the dream of material consciousness suffers the effects of accepting a body, giving it up, and so on. So when one becomes Krishna conscious, he becomes free from these false conceptions. So in this way, he gives opposite instructions to both sides, or different instructions to both sides, but spiritual instructions also that are beneficial for all. Then, as far as Rukmi was concerned, he'd boasted that he would defeat Krishna or else never return to his capital city. And now that's what he had to do, was give up returning to his capital. So he constructed a small cottage in a little village to reside there for the rest of his life. And Krishna brought Rukmini to Dwarka, where they had all kinds of celebrations with all kinds of paraphernalia. And and friendly kings of the Kurus and Pandavas came, and Bhishmaka also came after some persuasion. It wasn't such a happy incident because his eldest son had been humiliated, but after all, he'd wanted to marry his daughter to Krishna, so somehow his purposes, Prabhupada said, were served. All right. Any comments or questions? Yes, Rukmini. Speaking of Rukmini.
Hare Krishna. Marsh, I'm thinking about that.
I think we need more volume.
Okay. Marsh, I'm thinking about the point in the purport, in the text, when Prabhupada is saying that bearing the consciousness. I can't quote it verbatim, but
What about consciousness?
knowing that one has committed a fault, being conscious of it,
Yes.
is reaction enough, so to speak? I mean, it's not verbatim.
Yeah, that it's sort of punishment enough, he says, or let's see what he says. Yeah, this consciousness of one's own fault is like death.
Would it be correct to understand this, that the feelings of guilt is a reaction to a wrong action?
Is it correct that the feeling of guilt is a reaction to our actions? Yeah, we did something for which we feel guilty. If we hadn't done it, we wouldn't have the feeling. But we did it, and so we have the feeling, and quite possibly deserve to have the feeling. So, sure, it's in consequence of our own activities.
And then I was also thinking about the point of using humiliation as a punishment in Vedic culture. Is that?
Yeah, they use it, here it's mercy. We only humiliated him. We didn't kill him. So, but yes, the humiliation was used as a punishment. At least, I don't know that it was a systematic, prescribed form of punishment, but we want to punish someone, we humiliate him. That's sometimes done. And as indicated, that's letting someone off light. We don't torture him or kill him or something else of that nature, just humiliate him. But humiliation is strong also.
Last one, sorry. We see how Balaram is giving advice to Rukmini and Krishna, and how it seems to be opposite.
Just while I'm thinking of it, even in like America in the colonial days, and I think in Europe also, humiliation was used as punishment. If you put someone in the stocks, in the stocks, your hands are locked and your feet are locked like that, and you're put in the public square, and what is it? It's humiliation. So it's a warning that if you commit a crime, you may be humiliated. So it was systematically used in Europe and America. Not arguing for or against it, but I'm just pointing out that it's not unique to this context.
And then Marge, with Balaram's response to Krishna and Rukmini, if it seems like he's presenting both sides are true.
Yes. Yeah, Balaram is speaking the truth. He's just emphasizing different things to both parties.
So it speaks about truth being malleable.
Excuse me?
It shows how truth can be malleable.
Truth can be malleable. Yeah, or truth can be presented, what should we say? You can spin it this way or that way. You can selectively present the truth. There are different things you can do while speaking truth that may not, like in America, when you take an oath to testify before the court, take an oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But we don't always tell the whole truth. Sometimes we tell part of the truth, and sometimes something other than the truth too.
So my question then, Marge, is that how do we guard against presenting truth as teachings of Prabhupada that we know
I couldn't hear you.
Sorry. How do we guard against presenting truth like the teachings of Srila Prabhupada as we know it, but malleable to our own intentions.
Yeah, how do we avoid presenting truth, the truth of Prabhupada's teachings in a way that's spun to our own purposes? Yeah, first thing is we have to be honest. One has to be honest. And one should, there are rules for what should we say, interpretation or explanation of Shastra. It's not that you can do anything you want. There are rules of what constitutes proper argument, what constitutes improper argument. And we should be familiar with those, or it helps to be familiar with those, so that we don't construct blatantly bogus arguments. In the database, at least the desktop version, maybe even the online version, there's an introduction that I wrote called the Bhaktivedanta Database, What to Do with What You Find. Because it's easy to collect a lot of hits. You go through the database and I've got 41 hits, but do your hits actually support your point? Or how well do they support your point? So then there are various things that come into play. There are hits that are irrelevant. They have your keywords, but they don't support your point. They're just something somewhere around the topic. So to present that as evidence is absurd. Then there are quotes which support your point, but they're kind of one-off. They may be contextually sensitive. It makes sense to the person to whom it was spoken, but it's not a general rule for everyone. But we cite it as if Prabhupada said, and now that's the rule for everyone. So we have to be sensitive to context. Then there's statements. Yeah, context is extremely important, especially when it comes to things like conversations and lectures, where without the context you can really lose what it is that Prabhupada's saying, or letters, where they're to a particular person, and we need to determine, is this just for him, or is it for everyone, or was it just for that time and place? What's this about? Then there's using quotes when we know that there are counter quotes. That's called cherry picking or selective quoting, where we choose only those quotes that support or seem to support our position, and we ignore the ones that perhaps even oppose the position we're taking. So that's not the whole truth. It's the truth, it's nothing but the truth, but it's not the whole truth. It's cherry-picked. So that's another kind of doubtful argument or fallacious argument. So there are all sorts of different ways to try to make out that the evidence really supports a position that it doesn't support. Or not to recognize the weakness in your quote. All right, it supports the position, but it's not really the strongest quote in the world. Or maybe you have to sort of tie pieces of logic together to make it support your position. Prabhupada said our evidence is not on the basis of scripture and logic, it's on the basis of scripture. Like legal evidence, evidence from legal precedent or something, that's straightforward. And you have to put in a lot of logical machinery to show how it supports your position, then it becomes a lot weaker. So you want your evidence to be clear, straightforward, and so on, and not require a lot of interpretation or logical deduction to make it work. There is a place for that, but it's limited. Prabhupada gives the example, it's not only Prabhupada's example, it's quite the standard example, that it's said that there's a residential quarter situated on the Ganges. So then that needs interpretation, because the Ganges is water. So how can you have a house on the Ganges? So then the explanation is that on the Ganges means on the bank of the Ganges. So that's an example, that's the classic example of interpretation being needed and therefore being supplied. But when something's clear, then no need to interpret. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that was his criticism of the Mayavadi interpretation of Vedanta Sutra. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that I have no problem with the sutras, I can understand them clear. They're like the sun, you don't have to hold a candle up. But I can't follow your explanations. So indirectly he's saying your explanations are all nonsense. The sutras don't need your help, they're clear as they are. So interpretation is not to be supplied when something is already evident as to its meaning. So these are some of the things we have to deal with. In the larger context, I gave a course on this for the Mayapur Institute and Vrindavan Institute called Strong Speaking, Straight Thinking. It was based on at least the thinking part of it. I didn't make an extensive presentation of it in print, because really I adopted most of it from two books. One is Straight and Crooked Thinking by Robert Toules, Thoulless, which was out of print for many years but is now back in print. And the other is called How to Win an Argument, whose author I forget, but it's published by McGraw-Hill. There are similar books with similar titles, How to Win Arguments, but this one, anyway, is published by McGraw-Hill, and I've forgotten the name. It's sort of a sassy little book. But they, between the two of them, they do a good job of covering the most common tricks or fallacies in argument. After I gave the course in Vrindavan the first time, once the course was over, there was a local GBC meeting, and one of my students stumbled out of the meeting and said, "I just saw everything you talked about." I'm sure those bodies do much better these days. Yes, Janmashtami Prabhu. Microphone.
In making arguments, it seems it'd be really important for us to examine our motivation behind it.
Yeah.
And because sometimes it can just be political because of my false ego, wanting to defeat this person, so I'm better than him, and like that,
Yeah. This is touched upon briefly in the Bhagavad-Gita, where Krishna says, Vada Vada Vacham Chaham. I'm the conclusion. Amongst arguments, I'm the conclusion. And Vada is a particular kind of conclusion. It's the kind of conclusion reached when both parties are trying to understand the truth. That's one kind of argument. But there are other kinds of arguments that involve basically trying to destroy your opponent's position without really establishing your own, and making inconsequential arguments that don't really matter, but and then there's ad hominem arguments. There's so many things. So these are all analyzed in the Vedic system of understanding. I assume that this is found in Nyaya, which is logic, or Sankhya, which has to do with how we understand things. In any case, they're mentioned briefly in the purport to Bhagavad-Gita. In Western literature and argument, it's said that there are two kinds of arguments, attached and unattached, which correspond fairly well to what we encounter in the Vedic classification. In an unattached argument, we want to understand what happened, or want to understand what this is about. What's the truth of the matter? And I have one opinion, you have another opinion, but we're both flexible. We both have the same motive. We want to get to the bottom of this. Let's get to the bottom of this. So whether it's a philosophical point or a historical point, whatever it is, that's our motive. We're unattached. I'm ready to change my position. I just want to see a clear picture. And an attached argument is just the opposite. No matter what you say, I'm sticking to my position. And the other side has the same stance. So that kind of argument is unlikely to go very far in terms of settling something. No matter how many times you show that my arguments are useless, I'm not going to change. I'm not going to change because I'm right no matter what. Even though you defeated me, still I'm right. So, attached arguments and unattached arguments. Yes. I'm not going to give the whole course here, by the way. Yes. I think the outline, I think maybe online on the Mayapur Vrindavan Institute website, but the two books I drew on are actually much better than that sort of flimsy outline.
Hare Krishna, it seems that when Rukmini was, this is different point. When Rukmini was pleading to Krishna that she wants her to save her brother, she was trembling and her face was dry, and she was trembling so much that ornaments fell off of her body. We hear that these symptoms are manifest in the gopis of Vrindavan, and their ornaments fall to the ground and trembling of their body, the 8 ecstatic symptoms. And I'm wondering, are these ecstatic symptoms? And if they were, are they manifest in Rukmini for her brother? Or how can we understand these seemingly
They're not
similar?
specific. Are these ecstatic symptoms? You know, she's trembling and her voice is faltering and so on. Are these symptoms of ecstasy? They're not mentioned as symptoms of ecstasy. They're symptoms of emotion. And Prabhupada said, basically, she was like a woman. Women can be emotional. So so it's not necessarily like tears in the eyes. Someone's crying for their dead cat, that's not a symptom of transcendental ecstasy, even though there's a similar symptom on the ecstatic platform. So it's not mentioned that her affection for her brother was on the transcendental platform. Okay. We have a short class today because we started late. So shall we have kirtan? Yes, we should. Yes. And who's leading today? Hare Krishna.
Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare
Jai Om Vishnupad Punamansa Paribrajaka Charja Sto Shri Srimad A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Nama Charja Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gop Gopinath Sham Kun Radha Kun Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavan Tham Ki Jai Navadip Tham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Jamana Mai Ki Jai Tulsi Devi Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Gaur Premanande. Thank you all for coming. We're scheduled again for 5:30 as usual tomorrow, right? 5, what time? 5 to 6:30. We're scheduled to for 5 o'clock again tomorrow. And some books have come again for those who like books. And be sure to have some prasadam on your way. Thank you. And welcome to Madhupati Prabhu from New Jersey, and Shandili Mataji, also from New Jersey, who've come back to Vrindavan. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.